Dear students, in the last class I gave a small introduction to sampling, and you have also understood the importance of sampling in social research. In this class we will see different types of sampling in social research. Since sampling methods are advantageous in social research, it is important to arrive at a good and representative sampling. It is essential to decide how the item to be included in the study be selected, and secondly, its reliability. A good sample need not be large. In the words of P.V. Young, the size of the sample are not a necessary assurance of its representativeness. Relatively small samples properly selected may be much more reachable than large samples poorly selected. The actual selection of the sample should be so arranged that every item in the universe under consideration must have the same chance of inclusion in the sample. Sampling method can be broadly divided into two types: the probability sampling and the non-probability sampling. First, we will see what we mean by probability sampling. Probability sampling is used when the investigator is not sure of the characters of the population and does not have enough information, but could only guess. In probability sampling, each element or unit in the population has equal chance of being included in the sample. There are different methods that fall under probability sampling. They are simple random sampling, stratified sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, area sampling, and sequential sampling. The first one is simple random sampling. There are two procedures through which the samples can be drawn in simple random sampling method. One is lottery method and the other one is random number table. Lottery method. In lottery method, all the units in the population are assigned a unique number. These numbers are written on separate cards. These cards should be uniform in color and size so that they are identical. These cards are put in a bowl and shuffled. Then these cards in required number are picked out from the bowl at random without looking at the number written on it. When we reach the total number required for the research, the drawing is stopped. Then the units identified with the numbers in the cards are included for the research and data are collected from the person to whom the number has been assigned. The number of slips drawn is equal to the sample size required. One drawback of lottery method is that when the population is large, writing the number and shuffling is cumbersome. Hence, an alternative method, namely random number table, is adopted. What is random number tables? Number of random samples like Tippett's random number table, Eighth's tables and Fisher table are readily available. They are available in statistics and research methods books. These numbers are statistically arrived numbers. These numbers are generated by a pure random process so that any number has an equal probability of appearing in any position. In the first step, the researcher assigned unique numbers to each member of the population. Then numbers are selected from the random number table and the persons with these numbers are included for the study. The limitation of this method is that the process demands all elements of the population and then selecting the sample from them. This is a difficult task. The second one is stratified sampling. In stratified sampling, the researcher first divides the population into subpopulations on the basis of some features. After dividing the population into strata, the researcher chooses his samples from each substratum randomly. This method can be used in studies where the total population can be divided into strata with some homogeneity. For example, a study in a university may have stratifications based on departments, sex and also places of living. In stratified sampling, the researcher has more control over the size of the sample. Stratified sampling is more representative of the population than simple random sampling. There are two types of stratified sampling. They are proportionate sampling and disproportionate sampling methods. The first one is proportionate stratified sampling method. In proportionate stratified sampling, the number of units selected from each stratum is proportionate to the share of the stratum in the population. For instance, a study on consumer behavior in a marketplace cannot include equal number of male and female consumers. If this situation consists of 1000 males and 300 females, the study should include 500 males and 150 females, or if the researcher wants to make it a little smaller, then it could be 250 males and 75 females, which is proportionate to its total population. The second type is disproportionate stratified sampling. The proportionately stratified sampling is adopted when differences between stratum have to be studied, but sometimes some strata have more variables than other strata. Under such condition, disproportionate stratified sampling is found to be more apt to use. For example, in a study on occupational groups might require more samples from semi-skilled group than a professional group. The third one is systematic sampling. In systematic sampling method, every nth item within a defined population is selected in the sample. The researcher begins with a random start of the elements in the range of 1 to n. Then every nth item will be included in the sample. For example, the random start is number 9, then the 19th, and then every 10th person is included for the study. The major advantage of this method is there is no need to assign a random number to all the elements in the population, but when the researcher reaches the required number, the procedure is stopped. The next method in the probability sampling is cluster sampling. A cluster is a unit that contains final sampling elements, but can be treated temporarily as a sampling element itself. The researcher first samples clusters, each of which contain elements, then draws a second sample from within the cluster selected in the first stage of sampling. For instance, a large study on rural health has to have certain villages as its first cluster, from which the samples are to be drawn. A cluster sample can be a multi-stage sampling under certain type of research queries. For example, if the research as explained earlier, that is a research on health, requires a comparison of sex and age groups to get a thorough idea of the issue, then the sample clusters again are identified as based on sex and then age groups. The fifth type is area sampling. In area sampling, similar to cluster sampling, the clusters are formed on geographic basis such as states, districts and blocks. From the smallest cluster identified, all the households are included, or if the size is huge, then 10% or 50% of it will be selected for the data collection. This method could be adopted only in situations where geographic divisions are available. The major drawback in this method is the sample could be highly homogeneous. The next type of probability sampling is sequential sampling. In sequential sampling, the size of the sample is not fixed in advance, but a decision rule is stated before the sampling begins. At every stage, analysis is carried out and a decision is taken as to whether further sampling is required or not. For example, in marketing research, the sampling is continued till the time data are collected to establish the preferences of people. These are the important methods of probability sampling. And now we have one more design. It is non-probability sampling design. In non-probability sampling, the elements do not have a known or predetermined chance of being included as a sample. Now, I will explain to you the difference between the probability sampling design and the non-probability sampling design. Probability sampling. In probability sampling, every individual has known and equal chance of being selected. In probability sampling, we refer to both sample as well as population. Sampling frame is used. In this type of sampling, parametric tests are mostly used. In probability sampling, a sample is more representative of population characteristics. Non-probability sampling. In non-probability sampling, no probability is associated with an individual being selected. Here, sampling frame is not developed. In non-probability sampling, non-parametric tests are preferred. In non-probability sampling, nothing definite can be said about the representativeness of non-probability sample. These are the differences between probability and non-probability sampling design. Now, we will see different types of non-probability sampling design. The first one is accident sampling. In this type of sampling, the researcher simply includes whoever approaches till he reaches the desired number. In this method, the researcher selects any case, in other words, unit or person he comes across. For example, for a study on students' opinion on an issue, the investigator might question any student who comes out of the college. Quick surveys on public opinion adopt this method. This kind of sampling may not be representative and hence may lead to bias and wrong findings. But The advantage of this method is that it is convenient and economical. The second type is purposive sampling or judgment sampling. Here, the investigator selects a few persons whom he considers to represent the whole group. The investigator uses his ability of judgment and expertise and chooses the sample. Purposive sampling is used for exploratory design. For example, when we want to study student strike, it will be more suitable to pick up those students who are actively involved in it and eyewitness rather than to go for random sampling. Here the choice is made purposively. In this method, sampling error and bias are likely to be very high. Although judgment sampling enables the researcher to complete the work quickly and carefully, it has the disadvantage of researcher's bias. The next type is quota sampling. Quota sampling is a type of stratified judgment sampling. The basic objective of quota sampling is the selection of a sample that forms a miniature of the universe. Quota sampling begins with a matrix or table describing the characteristics of the target population. Depending upon the nature of the study, the researcher could decide the size of the sample with these features like male or female or the economic classes. The steps of quota sampling are: 1. To classify the population in terms of certain qualities or properties. 2. The proportion of samples falling into each category is decided. And 3. The investigator assigns a quota of respondents on the basis of his judgment. The advantages of quota sampling are: 1. Varying amounts of latitude are possible for analysis. 2. Less cost. 3. Easier. And 4. Estimates can be made quickly. Limited precision, bias and inaccuracy are the limitations of this technique. The next one is snowball sampling. This is another kind of non-probability sampling. Snowball technique is appropriate when the members of a special population are difficult to locate. The researcher starts data collection with 1 or 2 persons known to him first, and from them he collects the names of other samples and continues his work. The sample size gradually enlarges by a process of accumulation like a snowball. For example, studies on migration and migrant populations should follow this type of snowball technique. Sampling techniques, both probability and non-probability, have their own advantages and disadvantages. The researcher has to keep the needs, requirements, nature of the study, size of the universe and the scope of his study in his mind and select one of these techniques to ensure maximum reliability and representation. Dear students, in this class I explained to you 2 major types of sampling designs, that is the probability sampling and the non-probability design. Under probability sampling design, I covered the simple random sampling, stratified sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, area sampling and then sequential sampling. Under non-probability sampling, there are 4 types: accident sampling, purposive sampling, quota sampling and snowball sampling. Dear students, I want you to answer some questions. The questions are: 1. Explain different types of sampling with examples. 2. Differentiate between probability and non-probability sampling and write their merits and demerits. Okay, students, now I am sure that you have a fairly good idea about sampling techniques in social research.